Hello and welcome to part 1 of Calabaza Spice Todo Nice vegan concha cooking class. So first we're going to start off by preheating our oven to 350 degrees. Now for the next part, depending on whether you're using fresh pumpkin or canned pumpkin, this next segment is just going to be preparing the pumpkin that we're going to be using in the concha. So I'll just go ahead and slice up the pumpkin in half and then into slices before putting the pumpkin in the oven. So if you are using canned pumpkin at this time, there's no need for you to have the oven turned on. This is only if you're preparing your own pumpkin at home, and you can also boil it. I'm choosing to put it in the oven because I think it brings out a really unique flavor. So the first thing you're going to do is pour your active dry yeast. Make sure that if you are gluten-free that you are checking that this is gluten-free yeast. So you're going to pour that into a bowl like so. And you want to make sure that your yeast is getting its food. So we're going to actually be feeding the yeast some brown sugar. Also feel free to use granulated sugar or other sugar. I think that the brown sugar activates the yeast in a really interesting way and gives it a really nice flavor. And then you're going to add water. So this water should be at a temperature that is not too hot because you might end up killing the yeast, but also not too cold because then it will not actually activate the yeast. And you're going to let the yeast just bathe in there with its delicious sugar sweetener for maybe at least 10 to 15 minutes. In the meantime, what you can do is the pumpkin might be coming out of the oven now, and you're going to go ahead and peel off the seeds and the edge of the pumpkin. So you can actually keep those seeds and then use them to make your own roasted pumpkin seeds, and then you can also use the skins and the seeds both for compost. And meanwhile, we're just going to do this for a little while. Make sure that you're getting as much of the pumpkin into the bowl, because this is really where we're going to be using the pumpkin as both flavoring for the concha and as a binding ingredient in the dough. So go ahead and put that away. And then you're just going to go ahead and mash the pumpkin. Try to get as smooth as possible. Again, if you're using a puree, you likely have more liquid in your pumpkin than folks who are using the fresh pumpkin. So make sure you just mash it up, get it nice and smooth, because it's going to be part of your dough mix. You want to make sure it is completely smooth. And then the next part, you're actually going to go ahead and combine your yeast mixture with the pumpkin, and then you're going to be adding at least between half a cup to a cup of butter, depending on how much pumpkin you have at this point. And you want to really estimate that you're not putting in too much butter, because you also do have the density of the pumpkin and the brown sugar already in there. And then the next part is going to be flour. So for flour, I suggest starting with at least 2 cups of flour and then making your way through there. As you can see in the next part, my mixture initially was kind of wet, so I have to just keep adding flour to stabilize the dough a little bit further. So in this next part, you're going to go ahead and line your bowl with some greasing. So either, you can use some butter or coconut oil. You want to be able to place your dough in the bowl to sit for some time. As you can see, my dough here is a little crummy and much wetter and stickier than I'd like it to be. So you want to keep some of the wetness in it, because you don't want it to get super stiff that your dough doesn't taste much like thin stale bread and doesn't have the space to air out and rise, but you also don't want it to be super wet and sticky. So this is really where you're going to really be looking for a consistency of the dough. And I'm just playing around with it a little bit, adding some more flour, trying to get the stickiness out of it, making sure the flour is really worked in, because there might be parts of the dough that are wetter than most. And then you're just going to go ahead and cover it with a towel and leave it there for a minimum of 3 hours so that it can have its time to rest and rise, and you go ahead and do the same. So after 3 or more hours, you're going to come back to your dough, take off the towel. At this point, the dough should be about twice the size of when you first left it. So see, as you can see, mine was a little stickier than I wanted it, sticking to the bowl. Look at that. Okay, and then you're going to put it on your flat floured surface. Make sure you are lining a sheet with a greasing. You know, can use coconut oil. I'm using vegan butter here once again. And then I'm going to start shaping the dough. So this is all in preparation for the class. At the class point, then at that point you can either have your dough sitting like this, or you can go ahead and begin the shaping process during part 1. So I'm just going to roll balls of dough and shape them between my arms. I'd say about the size of a tennis ball, and then put them on the lined sheet. So with this recipe, at the size that I was making these conchas, I probably came with about 9 very large conchas. The recipe, I would say, probably makes for about 12, but I don't like to give a number because it really depends how big you're making your conchas, whether you have space to put them all on one sheet or not. These are going to be quite large, actually. So I'm just going to leave them on the sheet for some time so that they can rise on their own. And at this point in the class, you are all set for part 2. So just make sure you give some time for the dough to rise again now in its newly formed shape. And that concludes part 1 of the video. If you'll have any questions, make sure to email or DM at fempowertop@gmail.com. We'll see y'all very, very soon.